was the dead of winter, 1995. In the sleepy villages of western Ukraine, families gathered around small wood stoves for warmth. Children played in the snow as smoke curled out of chimneys. On the surface, life was simple, quiet, unchanged by the chaos of the world outside. But beneath the surface, something sinister was unfolding. One by one, entire households were being destroyed overnight. Families of 5, 6, even 8 people wiped out in a single evening. The police were baffled, the people were terrified, and the man responsible was a quiet drifter, barely noticeable to anyone who passed him on the street. His name was Anatoly Onoprienko. He would later be called the Beast of Ukraine, and his story remains one of the darkest in modern history. To understand Anatoly, we have to go back to the small village of Lasky. In 1959, Anatoly was born the youngest of 2 boys. His father was a soldier who had fought in World War II. His mother died when he was just 4 years old. That loss would mark him forever. His father, unable or unwilling to care for his sons alone, sent Anatoly and his brother to live at an orphanage. The brothers were separated. Anatoly's brother went to live with relatives, but Anatoly remained in the state-run orphanage system. He would later say this moment, being abandoned by his own father, was when the world became cold and cruel to him. In the orphanage, Anatoly grew up without warmth, without love, without guidance. He was just another child in a crowded room of lost children. And even as he grew into adulthood, that emptiness never left him. By his 20s, Anatoly was already drifting through life. He studied forestry at a vocational school. He worked odd jobs, lumberjack, dock worker, security guard, but he never stayed in one place for long. He was restless, lonely, and increasingly angry. He traveled through Europe for a time, staying in Germany and Austria. Some believe he may have committed crimes during this period as well, though nothing was ever proven. When he returned to Ukraine in the 1980s, he was a man who didn't seem to fit anywhere. In 1989, Anatoly committed his first known murders. He and an accomplice broke into a house, killed the couple inside, and stole what they could carry. But Anatoly felt betrayed when his partner turned him in for the theft. He served time, but when he was released, his rage had grown, and in 1995, he began what would become one of... Anatoly didn't kill randomly. He targeted entire families. He would walk through villages at night, scanning for homes that were isolated. He later described his method coldly. "I chose homes that had lights on. That meant the family was there. The more of them inside, the better. That way there would be no witnesses." Once inside, he would eliminate the adults first, then the children. No one was spared. He would then set fire to the house or ransack it for money and valuables before disappearing into the night. What made Anatoly so chilling was the contradiction between his brutality and his calm demeanor. Villagers would report seeing him walking along roads, carrying a small bag, sometimes even smiling to passers-by. No one suspected him. But behind those eyes was a man who claimed he was chosen by higher forces to carry out his acts. Police and psychologists later said he seemed to believe he was on a mission, as if he was punishing the world that had abandoned him as a child. By early 1996, panic had gripped western Ukraine. Villagers refused to sleep at home. They barricaded their doors, and men stayed awake at night with hunting rifles, watching over their families. The police formed a special task force. They set up roadblocks. They interrogated hundreds of suspects. But Anatoly was clever. He moved often. He traveled on foot or by train. He stayed in hostels and abandoned buildings. He even spoke to police officers on several occasions, and they let him go, not realizing who he really was. It wasn't good police work that finally brought him down. It was chance. In April 1996, a routine check of a hostel uncovered Anatoly's identification papers. When they questioned him, he confessed almost immediately, not just to the recent crimes, but to dozens more. In total, Anatoly claimed to have killed 52 people, though some believe the true number is even higher. He told investigators, "I am not the one to blame. It was what life made me. I was just a tool in the hands of fate." Anatoly's trial in 1997 drew huge crowds. People wanted to see the man who had terrified the nation. In court, he sat quietly, showing little emotion. When asked why he did it, he replied, "Why do people kill? Why do people steal? It's just the way the world works. I am no different." He was sentenced to life in prison. Ukraine had abolished the death penalty by then. He died in prison of heart failure in 2013. Experts have since studied Anatoly's case extensively. They believe his abandonment as a child left him incapable of forming real attachments. His years in the orphanage taught him to view people as disposable, and his belief that he was chosen gave him a twisted sense of purpose. One psychologist noted, Anatoly did not kill for pleasure. He killed to prove himself that he was more powerful than the families who abandoned him. In his mind, he was taking revenge on the idea of family itself. Anatoly Onoprienko's story is not just about one man's cruelty. It's about what happens when society fails its most vulnerable, when children are left without love, when anger and alienation are allowed to grow unchecked. It's also about the resilience of the human spirit, how communities banded together in fear, how police worked tirelessly to end his spree, and how justice was finally served. Tonight, as we remember this story, we must also remember the dozens of innocent lives that were lost. Fathers, mothers, children, entire families who never saw another sunrise because of one man's darkness. Their names may not all be known, but their memory remains. In the late 1980s, Japan was a nation on the rise. The economy was booming. Technology was advancing rapidly. Life in Tokyo seemed clean, safe, and orderly. But under the polished surface, there were cracks that widened when a series of horrifying crimes gripped the country in fear. Between 1988 and 1989, 4 young girls disappeared from quiet neighborhoods. The man responsible was not a gang member, not a stranger from a distant land, but an ordinary-looking young man, shy, quiet, unassuming. His name was Tsutomu Miyazaki, and the press would later call him the Otaku Killer. Tsutomu Miyazaki was born in 1962 in a suburb of Tokyo. His birth was not easy. He came into the world prematurely and with a rare condition called fused hand joints. This deformity left him unable to fully bend his wrists. As a boy, he was withdrawn. His classmates teased him for his small size, his strange hands, and his shyness. He retreated into himself, spending hours alone. He developed a fascination with comic books, horror movies, and fantasy worlds. His teachers described him as intelligent but quiet. He didn't cause trouble, but he didn't make friends either. At home, things were no better. His parents were busy and often cold toward him. The one person he seemed to connect with was his grandfather. When Tsutomu was in his early 20s, his grandfather passed away. This loss devastated him. For days, he sat in his room, staring at the urn of his grandfather's ashes. At one point, he even consumed some of the ashes, later saying it was an attempt to keep part of his grandfather with him. After that, he began spiraling deeper into his fantasies. He quit college and stopped trying to find work. He stayed in his room, watching horror movies, reading disturbing comic books, and collecting videotapes, hundreds of them. stacked in neat rows. By his mid-20s, Tsutomu had become almost invisible in his own community. He was that strange young man who rarely spoke, who avoided eye contact, who never left his room except late at night. But inside his mind, dark ideas were forming. He later told investigators he began having visions and urges, feelings he said he couldn't control. And in August 1988, he acted on them. On a hot summer day, Tsutomu spotted a young girl playing alone near her home. He followed her, struck up a quiet conversation, and convinced her to walk with him to a secluded area. What happened next was the beginning of a pattern that would shock Japan. Afterward, he left her body in the woods, returned home, and spent the evening watching his videotapes as if nothing had happened. The girl's parents called the police when she didn't come home. Neighbors searched, but no trace of her was found for weeks. In the weeks after the first disappearance, Tsutomu began taunting the victims' families. He mailed them strange handwritten letters, filled with nonsensical sentences, cut out newspaper letters, and even photographs of their children's belongings. The families were horrified. The police were confused. This became his pattern. Each time he took another young girl, he would send similar letters, as if reliving the crime through his own words. Between August 1988 and June 1989, Tsutomu took 4 young girls, all between 4 and 7 years old. Each time, he followed the same method, selecting a child who was alone, luring her away, and then discarding her body in a remote area. He collected small souvenirs from each victim, toys, clothes, even their shoes, which he kept in his room, hidden in drawers alongside his growing collection of disturbing videotapes. When police finally raided his home months later, they found more than 6,000 videotapes, stacked floor to ceiling. Some were horror movies, some were crime documentaries, many were extremely graphic. On his walls, he had pinned photographs of his victims, arranged neatly as if part of a collection. Investigators later said his room looked more like a shrine to violence than a place where someone lived. Tsutomu was finally caught in July 1989 when he attempted to lure another young girl. Her father caught him and held him until police arrived. At first, he denied everything, but after hours of questioning, he broke down and confessed. What he told investigators stunned them. "I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong. They were already part of me before I met them. I just wanted to hold on to them forever." His trial began in 1990 and lasted 7 years. The courtroom was packed every day. The public wanted to understand what drove this quiet, awkward young man to such cruelty. Psychiatrists argued over whether he was insane or simply evil. Some described him as detached from reality, trapped in a fantasy world of cartoons and violence. Others said he knew exactly what he was doing and simply didn't care. In the end, the court found him competent to stand trial and sentenced. In June 2008, almost 2 decades after his arrest, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed by hanging. He never expressed remorse, never apologized to the families, never explained his motives beyond vague statements about his urge to hold on to them. Experts believe Miyazaki represents a chilling case of alienation turned deadly. His deformity and the rejection he faced as a child left him bitter and withdrawn. His retreat into a fantasy world where he controlled everything became his escape, and then his reality. One investigator said, Miyazaki did not see his victims as human beings. He saw them as characters in his private story, and in his story, he was always the one in control. Tsutomu Miyazaki's story is about more than just one man's crimes. It's about the dangers of isolation, of untreated mental illness, of obsession unchecked. It's about the failure to reach a young man before he became a monster. And it's about the bravery of a single father who stopped him before he could take another life. Above all, we must remember the children, the little girls whose lives were cut short, whose families were left to grieve with no answers. Their names deserve to be remembered more than his. In Belgium, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a disturbing pattern began to emerge in a quiet Hungarian immigrant community. Members of one family, the Pandys, seemed to vanish one by one. First his wife, then his second wife, then his children. But nothing was reported. No missing persons reports, no cries for help. That was because the man at the center of it all was respected, feared, and trusted in his community. His name was Andrus Bundy, and his crimes would shock an entire nation. Andrus Bundy was born in Hungary in 1927. Little is known about his childhood, except that he grew up in a deeply religious household and became active in his church at a young age. By all accounts, he was intelligent, ambitious, and devout. He trained as a Protestant minister and became a teacher. In the years following World War II, he emigrated to Belgium, where he settled in Brussels. There, he quickly became a respected figure among the Hungarian Protestant community, leading services, teaching Bible classes, and counseling troubled families. Andrus married a fellow Hungarian immigrant and started a family. To outsiders, they seemed like the picture of piety and hard work. A devout father, a quiet mother, and several children who all attended church regularly. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere in the Bundy household was suffocating. Andrus ruled with an iron fist. He was domineering, manipulative, and abusive, but his family dared not speak out. Over time, his behavior became darker, more controlling, and then people began to disappear. In 1986, his wife Ilona disappeared. When friends asked where she had gone, Andrus claimed she had returned to Hungary to care for a sick relative. Then his second wife, Edith, whom he had married not long after Ilona's disappearance, also vanished. This time, he said she had left him after a fight and moved to another city. Then, 2 of his daughters and 2 of his stepchildren also disappeared, one after another. Each time, he offered plausible explanations. They went back to Hungary. They found work elsewhere. They didn't get along with me and moved out. And because he was a respected pastor, most people believed him. For years, no one questioned him. The Hungarian community was close-knit, and people were reluctant to challenge a man of God. Some suspected something was wrong, but no one dared to confront him directly. Meanwhile, Andrus continued to lead prayers, teach Sunday school, and speak about morality, even as he continued his reign of terror behind closed doors. In 1997, more than a decade after the first disappearance, one of his surviving daughters finally came forward. She went to the police and told them everything. She described years of abuse. She said he had eliminated anyone in the family who opposed him. She confessed that he had forced her to help him hide the evidence, that together they had disposed of the remains in barrels of chemicals, flushing pieces down the toilet, even feeding scraps to the dogs. She was terrified of him, but she couldn't keep the secret anymore. Police raided his home and found traces of blood in several rooms, chemical containers in the basement, and personal belongings of the victims hidden in closets and drawers. Andrus was arrested, along with the daughter who had helped him cover up the crimes. At first, he denied everything. He claimed his daughter was lying to get back at him for disciplining her as a child, but as the evidence mounted, his lies began to unravel. The trial of Andrus Bundy in 2002 was one of the most shocking in Belgian history. Prosecutors described him as a monster in a priest's collar, a man who hid behind religion to carry out some of the most chilling acts imaginable. Witnesses spoke of his cruelty, his manipulation, and his complete lack of empathy. The daughter who had turned him in testified against him, describing in detail how he had controlled every aspect of their lives and how he forced her to help him erase the others. Andrus was found guilty of 6 confirmed murders, though investigators believed the true number could be higher. He was sentenced to life in prison. Even at his sentencing, he showed no remorse. He smirked as the judge read the charges, maintaining that he was innocent and his family had simply abandoned him. He died in prison in 2013, still insisting he had done nothing wrong. Experts say Bundy is a textbook example of how power, when left unchecked, can corrupt absolutely. He used his position in the church to gain trust and silence dissent. One psychiatrist who evaluated him called him a narcissist who believed himself above everyone else, including God. He believed his family existed only to serve him, and when they disobeyed, he erased them without a second thought. The story of Andras Bundy teaches us how dangerous blind faith can be. When someone is placed on a pedestal, whether because of religion, status, or reputation, it becomes easy to ignore warning signs. His case is also a reminder of the courage it takes to speak out, even when the person you're accusing is your own father, and even when no one believes you at first. Above all, we must remember the lives that were lost, his wives, his children, his stepchildren, people who deserved to live full, happy lives, but were instead silenced by the one person they should have been able to trust the most. Their names and their memories deserve to be honored more than his. In Brazil, he became a legend. Some called him a hero, others called him a menace. But everyone knew his name. Pedro Rodriguez Filho, known as Pedrinho Matador, or Little Pedro the Killer, claimed to have taken more lives than almost any other man in Brazilian history. Yet, unlike many serial killers, Pedro claimed he didn't kill for pleasure. He killed because he believed it was justice. Tonight, we explore the life of a man who blurred the line between vigilante and villain, a man whose story forces us to ask, can violence ever truly serve justice? Pedro Rodriguez Filho was born in 1954 in Santa Rita do Sapucaí, a small town in the state of Minas Gerais, Brazil. From the very beginning, his life was marked by violence. His father was abusive, often beating his wife even when she was pregnant. In fact, Pedro was born with a slightly deformed skull. He later claimed it was because his father had kicked his mother in the stomach while she was carrying him. At home, the beatings continued. As a child, Pedro endured constant physical and emotional abuse from his father. The seeds of anger and revenge were planted early. When Pedro was just 14 years old, he claimed his first victim. His father had worked as a security guard at a local school, but was fired after being accused of stealing food. Pedro believed it was the deputy mayor who falsely accused his father. So he took a shotgun and waited outside the town hall. When the deputy mayor appeared, Pedro shot him dead. He then tracked down another guard he believed was also responsible and killed him as well. At just 14 years old, Pedro's path of violence had begun. After those first killings, Pedro fled to the city of Mogi das Cruzes outside São Paulo. There, he fell in with gangs and became a small-time enforcer. But unlike other criminals, Pedro refused to work for bosses he didn't respect, and he refused to harm anyone he didn't believe deserved it. He developed a reputation as a vigilante, targeting other criminals. He said later, "I only killed the bad people, the ones who hurt others, the ones who didn't deserve to live." While living in Mogi das Cruzes, Pedro met and fell in love with a woman named Maria Aparecida Olympia. For a brief time, it seemed like Pedro might find peace. He dreamed of starting a family, leaving his violent past behind. But those dreams were shattered when a rival gang killed Maria. Consumed with grief and rage, Pedro hunted down every single member of the gang responsible and took their lives one by one. He became a symbol of terror within the prison system, but also, strangely, a source of respect. Inmates feared him. Guards often looked the other way, and some even admired him for his code. He only targeted those he believed were truly evil. Over time, stories about Pedro began to spread. Newspapers called him the Brazilian Punisher, likening him to a comic book anti-hero. Some people saw him as a necessary evil, a man willing to do what the police could not, but others argued he was no different from those he killed. Just another criminal hiding behind excuses. Pedro spent more than 40 years in prison, longer than his original sentence required. In 2007, he was released and briefly lived as a free man. He even started the YouTube channel where he spoke about his past and warned young people against a life of crime. But his freedom didn't last long. In 2011, he was arrested again on charges of inciting violence. In his later years, Pedro claimed he regretted the path he had taken, but he insisted he had done what he thought was right at the time. I know now that killing solves nothing, but back then it was the only way I knew how to fight back. In interviews, he encouraged others to seek justice through the law, not through violence. Pedro died in 2023, reportedly the victim of an ambush by unknown assailants. His violent life had come full circle. Pedro's story is unique because of his clear sense of mission. Unlike most serial killers who act out of compulsion, Pedro saw himself as judge, jury, and executioner. One psychologist described him as a man who took the pain of his own childhood and turned it outward, punishing others for the world's injustice, but never healing himself. Pedro Rodriguez Filho's story forces us to question what justice really means. Does killing those who hurt others make you a hero? Or does it simply make you another killer? His life is also a stark warning of how cycles of violence can perpetuate themselves, and how easily a victim can become a victimizer. Pedro Rodriguez Filho was many things: a victim of abuse, a man of passion, a killer, a legend. But he was also human, flawed, broken, and tragic. We tell his story not to glorify him, but to remember how easily people can lose their way when justice seems out of reach. Alaska is a land of rugged beauty. Towering mountains, endless forests, and icy rivers stretch as far as the eye can see. It's a place where people go to escape or to disappear. In the 1970s and early 1980s, a quiet baker named Robert Hansen turned those wild lands into his own hunting ground. By day, he was a hard-working family man who sold bread and cakes in a small Anchorage shop. But by night, Robert Hansen was born in Iowa in 1939, the son of a Danish immigrant who owned a bakery. From a young age, Robert was painfully shy. His father was strict, demanding perfection both at home and in the family bakery. Robert spent much of his childhood working behind the counter and cleaning ovens. He developed a severe stutter, which made him the target of relentless teasing at school. To make matters worse, his skin broke out in acne during his teenage years, leaving him with permanent scars and a deep sense of humiliation. As he grew older, Robert found it hard to connect with others. He longed for attention, particularly from girls his age, but his awkwardness and appearance often led to rejection. He began to develop a bitter resentment toward women. He felt they overlooked him in favor of more confident, more attractive young men. At the same time, he discovered that he enjoyed hunting in the wilderness, the quiet patience it required, the thrill of stalking prey. Over the years, these two parts of his personality, his anger toward women and his love of hunting, would fuse into something truly horrific. In his early 20s, Robert began acting out. He set fire to a school bus garage in his hometown, later admitting he'd done it out of anger at being rejected by a woman. He served a short prison sentence, but was released early for good behavior. He married and divorced twice, moving to Anchorage, Alaska in the late 1960s. There he seemed to turn his life around. He married again, opened his own bakery, and became a father. Neighbors described him as polite and hardworking. Customers loved his pastries. No one suspected the darkness that lay just beneath the surface. In the early 1970s, women in Anchorage began to disappear. Many were young and vulnerable, women who worked as dancers or lived on the margins of society. Few people seemed to notice or care, but one by one, Robert would lure them into his car, often under the guise of offering them a ride or paying them for their time. He would take them to his small cabin outside town, where his true nature revealed itself. There, he would hold them captive, sometimes for days, before forcing them onto his private plane. He would fly them deep into the Alaskan wilderness, far beyond where anyone could hear them. And there, among the trees and snow, the hunt began. Robert Hansen turned the forests into his own arena. He would release his victims into the woods, giving them a head start, and then he would follow. Armed with a rifle and a knife, he hunted them like wild game. When he finally caught up to them, he ended the chase in the same brutal way he ended his other hunts, leaving their remains in shallow graves, hidden by the snow. For years, no one put the pieces together. Because many of his victims were already living on the margins, their disappearances attracted little attention. Robert might have continued his secret life even longer, if not for one woman who got away. In 1983, a young woman managed to escape from his cabin while he was out of the room. She ran barefoot to the road and flagged down a passing truck. When she told police what had happened, they were skeptical at first, until she described details of his home, his stutter, and his trophy collection that only someone who had been there could know. Detectives began to look closer at Robert Hansen. They discovered he had a criminal record. They obtained a search warrant for his house and his small private plane. What they found shocked even the most seasoned investigators. In his attic, they discovered a hidden cache of weapons and a collection of jewelry and personal items that had belonged to his victims. They also found a chilling map of the Alaskan wilderness, with dozens of tiny X's marking locations where he had buried bodies. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Robert confessed. He admitted to killing at least 17 women, though some believe the true number is higher. He told investigators he saw his victims as nothing more than prey. It was like a game, he said. The only thing I ever wanted was to find a girl who wouldn't run away, without the possibility of parole. Experts say Robert Hansen was a classic example of a man who externalized his own pain. Rejected and humiliated as a young man, he spent the rest of his life taking revenge on women he felt had wronged him. One psychologist described him as a man who turned his insecurities into a weapon, finding power only by taking it from others. Robert Hansen's story is a reminder of how predators can hide in plain sight. Neighbors saw him as a kind baker, a family man, a quiet neighbor, but behind that mask was a man who spent years planning and executing some of the most chilling crimes in Alaskan history. His story also reminds us of the courage of survivors, like the woman who escaped, whose bravery ended his reign of terror. At least 17 women lost their lives because of Robert Hansen. Many of their names are known. Some are still unidentified. We remember them tonight, not just as victims, but as people, daughters, sisters, friends, whose lives were stolen too soon.